Okay, so I've actually been planning this video for a couple of months. I shot some of it back in October and November before lockdown hit, and then the M1 MacBooks and Macs released, and it kind of felt like this video wasn't so relevant anymore. But then I thought about it a bit more, and the rigs we're talking about are more affordable, and we're also including Windows-based rigs here. So I thought I'd still do a video on this, and you can kind of see the travel rigs we use in Phase Drive Media. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Sam, and before we start, I'd like to remind you all to please subscribe if you haven't already. We upload at least once a week on video production, photography, music production, gear kit, home media setups and more. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, please be sure to subscribe, notifications on to stay updated on our latest videos. Okay, so I'm actually having to refilm a section here because the microphone cut out partway through, which is really annoying. I put the studio away, and so I'm going to have to do it this way. So basically this video is going to be about my travel rig setup and Neil's. So firstly, talking about mine, I have my big main rig here. You can see the footage I shot earlier. I've got some of the audio here, but unfortunately some of it did cut out, so it will suddenly cut to previous me. So I've got my main rig here, which is 64 gig of RAM, an i7 7820X 8-core processor. I might upgrade it at some point. It's got the LGA 2066 socket, so I might get one of the new i9s at some point. It's also got a GTX 1070, a couple of SSDs, so it can handle, most of what I throw at it, which is 4K video, some After Effects stuff, Photoshop, and I can multitask, which is exactly what I need. However, sometimes I do need to travel for work, and I thought since lockdown is going to be easing soon, at least here in the UK, I thought I'd just talk a little bit about the travel setup. So when I was looking to set up my travel rig, I wanted something that wasn't going to be hefty. I wanted something lightweight that could still handle, most of what I needed to do when I'm away, while also not breaking the bank. So that sounds like kind of a tall order. Now, I was quite interested in looking at thin and light laptops, and you usually obviously have to spend a bit of a premium to get something that kind of is actually usable beyond 4 gig of RAM or something really stupid like that. Now I'm coming from having a Surface 3 tablet laptop hybrid thing, which I could run Photoshop on, maybe a bit of Cubase, but I could not run Premiere on it apart from maybe doing a small amount of 1080p video. I wanted something that I could at least edit 4K video on that had a bit of GPU acceleration. So I looked at a few different models. I looked at Asus and HP, but in the end I came across a Huawei laptop. Now I quite like Huawei. I know there's obviously that stuff going on with the phones, but they do make good products, and this laptop is no exception. So this is the Huawei Matebook 13 i5 version. It's the 2020 edition. It's got obviously an i5 processor. Now it is the lower power one, but it also has a 512 gig M2 SSD in here. It has 8 gig of RAM, which I would have liked a bit more, but 8 gig I can work with. But most importantly, it has an NVIDIA dedicated MX250 graphics card. Now that graphics card isn't like the most amazing graphics card in the world. It's pretty basic, but to have it in something of this class, which was around about £700 and sort of this weight and everything, that's quite surprising, and that's not the sort of thing you usually expect. Usually you get onboard graphics cards in a laptop like this, so that was a real plus for me in what I knew was going to sort of help things out. I know the MX250 isn't going to give me the most amazing hardware acceleration, but I can tell you now from experience that it does make a difference, especially when it comes to playback. So a few months ago I made a video using drone footage I shot back in Kent, and I made a little short film with it, and I edited it entirely on this. The only thing I did was export on my main computer just because I didn't want to wait as long, but actually editing it on this was really quite pleasant. I didn't have any major issues. Obviously I wasn't doing loads and loads of layers or anything, but to be able to just use the footage from the Mavic Air, which is harder to playback than GH5 footage sometimes, played back pretty well for the most part. After you do have to use it on kind of half resolution, sometimes a quarter, but it worked pretty well. I think that's partly down to having an actual dedicated graphics card in this. So it's also got things like a fingerprint scanner, pretty decent sized keyboard, huge trackpad, and the screen is probably my favorite thing of all. It's this really nice 3:2 aspect ratio, which actually is really good for any kind of media editing. You get a bit more space to use your timeline. Yeah, overall I'm really impressed with it. It's also got 10 hours battery, which in practice is probably more like 6 or 7 hours, but for me that's plenty. I mean, very rarely would I need to use this for longer than 4 or 5 hours not plugged in, and actually I have been able to get like 8 or 9 hours if I'm doing kind of light work. However, if I'm doing video, I probably do want to plug it in. Now, unfortunately, it does only have 2 USB-C ports, one either side, which is not ideal, although they are pretty fast. Only the left side carries power, which is kind of annoying. You can't plug it in both sides. But you do also have the option of using like dongles and stuff, which, you know, dongle life is just a thing now, guys. So yeah, if you want the thinner light laptop, you're probably going to have a dongle as well. So also as well, I've kind of gone for like a grey, white and blue theme. So I've got obviously the blue case. I've also got these wireless Sony headphones, which I use because whereas my setup here is tons of wires, I wanted to have it fairly minimalistic, so I've got my set of blue Sony wireless headphones, which do a great job, and then I've got my white wireless Bluetooth mouse. I didn't want to have one of those mice with a USB dongle, I just wanted a Bluetooth one which works a lot better. And then also the actual charger itself, which is USB-C, which is quite nice. It charges really, really fast as well. That's also white. So normally I don't really care about colour schemes, but I kind of just liked the aesthetic of doing that. Now it came with, it was actually really useful, it came with an adapter dongle already, which has got HDMI, an additional USB-C, and additional USB-A as well. That's also white. However, I ended up getting hold of this, I'd probably say better dongle version, which actually gives me HDMI to USB-C and a memory card reader and a USB-C reader, and also an Ethernet port, which, you know, can be nice if you want to get on that sweet wired connection. If I'm wanting to travel really light, I do also have this really small USB card reader which has USB-C and USB-A, and that does run at USB 3 speed, so I can transfer things fairly quickly from my camera if I'm using it. And then when I'm actually away and I'm working, a lot of the time what I'm going to do, I'm going to end up bringing onto this main computer anyway. So I usually have a sort of dump drive, which is, so I'll work usually off the internal drive if it's a big video, because obviously SSD speeds makes it a bit better. But then, you know, when I want to copy it onto something, I'll copy it onto one of these just standard Seagate USB drives. This is a terabyte, I think, so I can easily transfer onto the main computer. But then lastly, one extra bit I also got hold of was an additional portable monitor. Now usually when I go places, you know, if I'm going to go and stay with Neil or Dan or someone, usually there is a monitor available, but for when there's not, if I want to have something that's sort of a bit less cumbersome, I looked at getting one of these 13-inch sort of fairly affordable 1080p monitors. So it's actually in this kind of nice, cool little folio case, again, kind of bluey grey, kind of sticking with the same theme here. And that's only cost me about 125 quid from a brand called Corprit, which, funnily enough, I'd seen some reviews online that didn't really rate it that highly, but actually I've been really impressed. I can run the entire thing off USB-C, so I don't have to actually run it off mains, although if you're doing quite intense work and you're running a lot of things off a single USB-C, I would still run it off mains just to be on the safe side. However, it just means that I can have a really elegant solution and have a dual monitor setup, you know, even when I'm away, because I find dual monitors is just so much better for productivity. Now, the thing I don't like about this is it's quite thick for what it is, and also as well, considering how thick it is, they could have got a full-size HDMI port in here. It's a mini one, which it did come with a mini cable, which was, I suppose, kind of nice, but that would have been something to kind of take it to the next level. But for the price I paid for it, it does actually have a vase mount system on the back, so I can take this off, but it just sort of stands up like this, kind of like an iPad would. And it's just really, really good to have that extra kind of screen real estate, especially when I want sort of an additional preview window when I'm editing, because obviously those of you who edit on laptops will know that usually the preview screen is kind of small, and it's nice to see something on a bigger screen when you're doing kind of a video edit. And because I've been so impressed with the screen, and, you know, even as built-in speakers, which aren't amazing, but, you know, if you're in a pinch and you want to kind of, I don't know, plug in an Xbox or something, you can, and it will play pretty well. But because I'm not traveling so much at the moment, and because actually I've been really impressed with it, I've been using it as a third monitor for my setup. So this is what I use for kind of file browsing. So if I've got Premiere open on that window, and then on the other window I've got Preview, I can just drag files in from this screen down below, which does make a huge difference. Same thing with Cubase. If I want to have a separate window just for plugins to pop up on, I usually use this third window, and it does make like a massive difference again. So my favorite thing about this entire setup is I can have kind of almost like a miniature version of this setup, and the package is fairly small, and I can shove this all in the backpack and basically have, as well as cables obviously, can have everything I need in quite a nice sort of form factor. And if I just want to take the laptop, I can. The only other thing I do also use sometimes is a UR22. So currently I have Cubase Artist 11 on the main computer, but I also had a copy of Elements 10.5 just on my license cloud. So I ended up loading onto this one, as well as also logging into my Adobe account onto here. So basically everything I'd use on my main computer, I can also use on here. So if I'm going away for like a week or two to do a lot of shooting, I can still get most stuff done that I need to on here, and then kind of just finish off bits and do all the exports when I get home. So that's really, really useful. And I've got to say, you know, if you're someone who prefers Windows, like I'm not a big fan of using Mac stuff. You know, that's just personal preference. You know, I won't deny Macs can be quite nice, and I'm very impressed with what I've seen in the M1 Macs. I kind of am almost annoyed. I kind of want them to fail a little bit, but you know, we've got to be honest here, they have been largely quite impressive. I just prefer Windows, it just works for what I want, and this setup for me works really well. Now, I wouldn't recommend this if you're wanting something to be a laptop that you can use at home and also take with you, because you'll probably want something a bit more powerful, something a bit beefier. I wouldn't want this laptop to be my kind of only rig. My main thing was that I wanted something that was powerful enough to do what I need to do, and the only thing I really wish is that the laptop had 16 gig of RAM rather than 8, because I can't upgrade it because it's soldered on, whatever. But I will say 8 gig of RAM does work better than I expected. But yeah, as I said, I can get most of what I need to do done when I'm away, but for sort of more intense tasks, and obviously when I'm here, I will use my main computer. So it's quite a good combination, and I can highly recommend the Huawei Matebook line of laptops. They are usually priced lower than, you know, Asus and Acer and HP laptops of similar specs. To get something in this form factor with an MX250 NVIDIA graphics card, usually you're going to pay a couple of £100 more. So actually, to have paid sort of £700-ish to actually get that and 8 gig of RAM and an i5, that's, you know, that's pretty impressive, especially in a thin and light laptop like this. I will also say that this Huawei laptop's definitely got a bit of heft to it, which kind of feels nice, feels very premium. But also as well, it, you know, you don't really notice sort of having some whacking great laptop in your bag like you would with sort of a bigger, heavier, like gaming laptop.
So Neil here, talking about my laptop-based rig, my portable rig, and I want to say a bit about why I use it and what I use it for. The sort of things that it gets used for tend to be kind of songwriting and experimenting with usually plugins, which I wouldn't otherwise go to. So on the main system, the iMac Pro system, I've got tons of plugins. But I've got a limited set on the laptop, and that gives me a kind of bit of focus. So I can look at plugins and use plugins, which probably I wouldn't normally go to as a kind of default. And that, I think, is very useful for the creative process. Also, the iMac Pro, although you can lug it around, and I've got a bloody great case, it's not particularly portable, and it's, you know, it's a little bit more valuable. I'm a bit nervous about taking it sort of with me wherever I go. So it's basically a 2010 MacBook Pro 13-inch laptop. So not particularly powerful. I think it's a duo-core processor, so 2 cores, that's it. I've been upgraded to 8 gig of RAM, and I am thinking about putting in 16. It's also got a 1 terabyte SanDisk SSD, Ultra SSD, I think, in it as well, which helps it run a bit quicker. Now, I usually use it with one of these Dell screens, which is a U2412M. So it's running at 1920 times 1200, I think, so a little bit above HD. And it's also a really useful screen because it swivels, it tilts, it sort of goes up and down. And we've got quite a few of these in the company because they're just really good standard screens. And I have a bag for this, and it's much more easy to transport than the iMac Pro. So I usually take that with me and run the mixer window like I'm doing here on the larger screen, and then the project window on the MacBook Pro screen. And that usually works pretty well. Stuff I run with it, I've got a little Orkey USB hub running into the Steinberg UR 22 Mark II interface. And then for the MIDI keyboard, it's an Akai MPK Mini, which is a great little keyboard. It's got pads and keys and lots of rotary encoders, so really good for controlling synths, and portable and, you know, cheap, fairly cheap. So that's the basic hardware. In terms of software, I tend to run things like Spitfire Labs free plugins, because there's quite a lot of them. There's 33 of them. I don't usually get time when I'm doing sort of work on this system to experiment with stuff like that. So it's useful to have them on here because that forces me to have a look at something that I don't usually go to. And this is the project at the moment, is just using Labs plugins, and they're really good, so worth checking out. It's running Cubase Elements 10.5, I think it's at the moment, and that's as high as I can go on Elements with this setup. And also I've added a couple of Steinberg synths. I've actually purchased them separately. A couple of expansions like Dark Planet and Hypnotic Dance, and also got Arturia Analog Lab on there. I think version 4, maybe version 5, I can't remember which. Because Arturia are very generous with their licenses, so I tend to use the spare licenses for the Analog Lab on here. On the main system, I just have separate synths. So that's quite useful. So yes, it tends to be stuff that I wouldn't necessarily go to, and we have a limited set of basic Waves plugins on there, like the 2500 compressor and the EQP1A clone, just that I can do some basic mixing. So it's a fairly stripped down set of plugins, but I find that really useful. Again, it's, as I say, it forces you to really look at some of those plugins and sort of play around with them, which is, you know, a useful thing to be able to do. So that's basically what I use it for. So going forward, I am probably going to look to upgrade the laptop at some point to something that will run a lot more complex and bigger projects and larger, more complex, more processor memory hungry plugins and libraries. But that is a fairly significant investment for something decent from Mac, so I'm not in any hurry. I mean, this works at the moment as a kind of, you know, a sketch pad, if you like, useful sketch pad for doing, you know, new ideas with plugins you wouldn't necessarily go to. And for that, I think it's very useful. You tend to come up with more interesting stuff because you've got a limited set of creative tools. So in that terms, it functions very well. And during lockdown, I haven't used it a massive amount. That's confessed, because I haven't been traveling a lot, but it really does come into its own when I'm traveling more regularly. You know, so I'm usually traveling 2 or 3 times a week, and taking that with me is, you know, really, really helpful. Sometimes I'll just use it on its own without the second screen, just like I say, to get ideas down and play with plugins and settings and stuff. So, you know, it's a useful bit of kit. Probably will upgrade at some point, but at the moment it does what I want, and it's a useful sort of second string to the main system. And back to you, Sam.
So there we go. That's 2 of our travel rig setups. You know, when you're doing videography and traveling around, you know, having a smaller version of your main rig is useful. Now, I'd never want to do all my work on a laptop just because I like the ability to upgrade. I'm a power user, and I just think having a good beefy desktop, whether it's an iMac Pro, whether it's a Mac Pro, whether it's a PC, whatever it is, I think it's good to have a full-on desktop with lots of monitors. That's my preference. But also just having a travel rig that's portable enough that it's not really going to kind of take up too much space, but it's also powerful enough that can do the job. So yes, I hope you all enjoyed that. That was just a bit of an insight into some of our kit. If you are interested in seeing more of, you know, our setups and what we use, what we don't use, or what we might be getting, then let us know in the comments, and we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.